Welcome back to another edition of the FODcast, the show that brings you the cutting edge insights into the future of digital commerce from the biggest leaders operating in the space right now. Every 2 weeks, we're bringing you interviews with people who are either dominating or innovating within the digital commerce sector. So these people have kindly given up their time to tell us their stories, all in the aid of providing you guys with a glimpse of the future into digital commerce. So we'll be bringing you people from all spheres of digital commerce tech, from retailers and systems integrators to software vendors and full service digital agencies. Today, I am very pleased and excited to be joined by Branwell Moffat, co-founder even of Envoy Digital, which is now KPS following an acquisition, and he is currently the UK Director of CX Consulting. So Bran, we've known each other for pretty much almost a decade now, and I've watched you grow your business from 7 or 8 people in a little 3-story townhouse in Wimbledon to over 100 plus across multiple locations in the UK and Europe, and becoming the hybris partner of choice. In recent years, you've completed the successful sale of the business. So you guys are now part of the KPS group. And every time we speak or I look on your website, you seem to have won yet another award.
Thanks very much and good to be here. So yeah, I'm Branwell. I'm the the UK Director of CX Consulting at KPS. So I've been in the e-commerce and digital commerce industry since the late 1990s, would you believe? Started off a small micro web design agency with my brother. There were actually 3 of us crammed into a tiny little spare room, which had 1 computer between us. Never really planned to get into this business at all. During the summer after I graduated, my flatmate's dad asked me to build a website for his organization. So I actually bought a dummy's guide to HTML and built my first website. Pretty awful, to be honest, the first one. But really after that, yeah, we saw an opportunity out there. So we went from, as you said, a fairly small company. And at the time we were building either bespoke e-commerce platforms, started then using platforms like Magento. But then about 8 years ago, we got to a sort of stage where we felt that our kind of consultancy-led focus, kind of quality and service, was much better suited to the enterprise space. And we both myself and my brother, the founders, come from a business background, not really a technical background. So we always took a kind of real consultative approach to these things. So we effectively took the assets of the company and invested them in creating sort of a new version, really. It was focused on delivering enterprise kind of level CX platforms. The name was Envoy Digital, so we rebranded at the same time from our original Foresight Business Solutions. And we decided we wanted to do that primarily using the SAP CX stack. So Tim, yeah, as you mentioned, since then, just over 3 years ago, we were acquired by KPS AG. They're a large German digital transformation consultancy. Again, a lot of focus on SAP, but not exclusively. And since then, yeah, we've seen a huge amount of growth, around 40% a year, sort of year on year for the last few years. And yeah, you very kindly mentioned award, and actually a sneak peek. We've just won SAP CX Partner of the Year globally.
Nice, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that was sort of just came out a couple of days ago. So in the Pinnacle Awards, yeah, KPS has been voted the best CX globally. So very, very happy with that. I think that sort of sums up for me kind of what we've managed to kind of build and grow over, say, the last 8 years since we decided to kind of completely change the business.
Is that a FODcast exclusive, Bran?
It is a FODcast exclusive, yes. It's
Okay.
yeah, hot off the press. There's press releases, whatnot on their way. But yeah, it's something that we're very, very proud of. We were runners up last year, and actually to win the award this year is brilliant achievement.
Yeah, that's huge. Awesome. Congrats to you all.
Thank you.
So I was trying to do a bit of research on you, Bran, just to discuss some of the past and I guess how you got into this space. And you kind of touched upon it now, which is good because your LinkedIn profile really doesn't say very much at all. So I sat down researching last night and I was like, okay, so we have Unilever, we have Know-How Mart, and we have KPS. So it'd be good just to know, you mentioned you set up a micro web design agency in the 90s with Barney.
Yep.
Was that really the first thing you did in the digital commerce tech space?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was, I'd literally just graduated in 1997 for a business studies degree. I was all lined up for a job in sales, actually, selling computer hardware. And I had the summer off before I started that. So that's when my flatmate's dad sort of asked me to do this for him. So I literally did genuinely buy Dummy's Guide to HTML. Obviously, it was all hard coded. It was all dial up. It was all very, very basic. And then I went on to this other job. Really didn't enjoy it. It took 6 weeks for me to realize this was really not the kind of place I wanted to be. It's a bit of a boiler room, to be honest. So I very quickly left and then set up what was known as Foresight Business Solutions at the time, where there were just 3 of us at the start, building very hand-coded static content websites, very, very small scale. But we very quickly realized that actually there were good opportunities here, and we started to hire a few people who kind of could actually build things. We built hired programmers and designers, and we built our first e-commerce site. I think it was in 1999, and the customer was actually Office Shoes, and they're still a customer today. So that is what 22 years later, they still remain our customer, and they're our first e-commerce customer at the time.
Nice. They're obviously very pleased with what you produced back in the late 90s.
I think if they saw it now, maybe not. Yeah, I think the story there is something that, again, I'm quite proud of, is the focus we have on service and quality and being partners, and to have a customer for that long, and this is a pretty big customer with a very sort of big retail presence in the UK and a big e-commerce presence. I think we're really proud of the fact that we have customers. We've multiple customers that we've had for more than a decade, and I think it's testament to the approach we take with kind of integrity, honesty, and quality. So yeah, we started there, and as I said, we kind of moved more and more into e-commerce, away from the kind of hard-coded static websites, which were fairly common in those days. Got to a stage generally that it was either sort of bespoke e-commerce websites or started using platforms like Magento, but it was really the move we made into the SAP enterprise space around 8 years ago, which really changed our business. We sort of decided consciously to focus on these much bigger, larger enterprise projects because it better suited the way we work, that kind of very business focused, consultancy focused approach was very, very hard to do at a much smaller scale.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, Bram, but what was the biggest difficulty you found going from doing, so it was .NET, then Magento, and then Hybris, which was the enterprise scale platform delivery. What was the biggest difficulty you found going from kind of mid-level to enterprise?
I think it was mainly around your portfolio and your experience. So, it's that kind of ironic thing that people want to buy from someone who's already got the experience and got a good portfolio of building these things. And how do you get your first one? So we were relatively lucky that we had some existing customers that sort of migrated onto bigger platforms. But I think we were already in that the way we tried and wanted to deliver projects was already sort of set up to deliver these enterprise projects, but often the kind of smaller projects we were in just didn't have the budget to be able to deliver a high quality enterprise solution. So I think not having a kind of large portfolio, you know, the portfolio that we enjoy today, which is pretty unprecedented, you know, we didn't have anything like that at the start. So we had to work very hard to convince some new customers that, you know, although we didn't have 10 plus hybris builds under our belt, we were still the right people to do it. So I would say, you know, that sales process at the beginning was harder. I think also when you move to a different technology, the challenge is knowing what good looks like. So, you know, when you're hiring the people to work in that technology, it takes time to understand what makes a good architect, not such a good architect, to see through people who might sort of big up themselves a little too much. So I think, again, moving technology took us a little while to really understand what good looks like. So I would say those are probably the two biggest challenges at the time.
Interesting. So 8 years ago, you made the decision just to solely build solutions on hybris, obviously now SAP CX. Yeah. Now, over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, many competitors have decided to open things up and start delivering solutions across multiple platforms, utilizing things like BigCommerce or any of the other sort of challenger platforms. But you guys have decided to stick true with SAP and just be a sole provider for SAP CX. So how do you feel like that has contributed to your growth in the last few years?
It's allowed us to specialize, certainly. And it's allowed us to build the reputation for being the guys to go to for a quality SAP solution. I think you're absolutely right that there are changes afoot where there's quite rightly a move away from sort of large monolithic solutions. And I think, you know, one of the reasons why we still really just deliver SAP is that SAP are also moving in that direction. So last week, we were announced as new members of the MAC Alliance. So for those of you who don't know about the MAC Alliance, it's really an organization that's really promoting a sort of composable commerce, service-driven API architecture, cloud-based. And some people might think that actually, you know, SAP is contrary to that, but actually SAP are really moving in that direction. So most new SAP commerce solutions we are delivering now are actually, commerce is one component, part of a larger platform. Now that might comprise of other SAP CX products such as Marketing Cloud, Customer Data Cloud, so on and so forth. But quite often it's including other things as well. So more often than not, we're integrating with another content management system, personalization engines, and we're also using things like Spartacus, which is the new headless single page application front end. So I think our view really is that we can still build a kind of modern, flexible architecture using SAP components. And, you know, SAP doesn't just mean monolith. So for us, you know, we're busy, we're still growing significantly within the SAP space, or using SAP at our core. So we haven't necessarily seen the need to start to branch out into different technologies, because we'll run into the challenges Tim just mentioned. You know, what does good look like? How do we start really competing within that industry? And we feel we've still got a lot to add with SAP technology at the core.
Yeah. What you mentioned a few minutes ago about SAP is commonly known in the market as a monolith architecture is quite interesting, because I saw you having a conversation on LinkedIn maybe a few days ago now with somebody, and you were saying exactly what you just said about how SAP doesn't mean monolith. And it's why do you think that so many people in the industry aren't aware of this at the minute?
That's a good question. I think because historically, SAP has been known for, either big ERPs or big platforms. I think, it's a journey SAP are going on, and it's great to see. Why people are not so aware of that, I don't really know. I think, maybe we and SAP and others need to shout a bit louder about the kind of modern architecture that they are building, because they're building some really good stuff. They've got various services that they're rolling out, things like a search service, potentially even like a cart service. So really, it enables us to use all these different components, even like their middleware, CPI, to kind of knit them all together, and we can work with customers to pick and choose the components that really work for them. So some of our customers will really use all of the different SAP CX components, bring them all together. But others might not. They might use some and others. But back to your question, why people might not necessarily see SAP in that sort of new, more modern architecture. I guess the message just needs to get out there a bit stronger.
Yeah, okay. I think that's probably right, because it's interesting, because every day, as someone that recruits extensively into the SAP CX area and has done for the last 10 years, often I speak to people who tell me that hybris is dead and you need to work with a new challenger technology or focus your effort somewhere else. But actually, the last 12 months have just shown to prove that that's not the case. We've had more and more success in those areas. There's more projects being won across the whole of Europe. So the figures kind of contradict what a lot of people are telling me on the phone. So it's interesting talking to somebody like you, who's at the forefront of the product itself. You know exactly what they're doing, what their roadmap is, and what it's going to look like in the future.
I mean, it's got a huge solid foundation behind it. It's a very capable and scalable platform. And I think, it's got that foundation of coming from hybris, which, was known as one of the biggest, most solid platforms. But what SAP are doing, as I said, very wisely, is actually taking the best bits, but actually making it a more modern architecture. So, there's some way, there's a reasonable way to go. But certainly what we've seen in the last couple of years has really encouraged us. It's meant that we don't see the need, to actually start branching out into more and more different technologies, because we can still solve a lot of customers' challenges using, what we get from SAP.
So it sounds like SAP are trying to create kind of a modular setup to how they deliver the various elements that you need as a retailer. And we were talking to a chap called Michael about Spryker, who provide a very similar kind of setup. Does that mean things like the upgrade paths are going to be easier and more cost efficient, as opposed to having to upgrade the entire hybris platform at once?
Yeah, upgrades and deployments. So, previously you want to deploy a small change, you deploy the entire big monolithic solution, and that's a challenge, and also upgrades. But actually, the more componentized is the word, your solution is, the easier it is to upgrade certain things, to deploy things separately. So it helps you become more agile, and ultimately your total cost of ownership can be lower. So, we already have this with Spartacus front end versus the kind of SAP Commerce backend. So prior to Spartacus, when we had accelerators, you wanted to change your PDP, you often had to deploy the entire application to make maybe a fairly small sort of layout change. Now you can deploy Spartacus completely separately. It is a separate application. You can host it somewhere else. So it can make you much more agile. And what SAP have also done is with the emergence of CCV2, which is Commerce Cloud version 2, it's a sort of fully Azure cloud-based auto-scaling hosting solution. And actually, we've seen huge success with that. It makes the whole deployment process so much faster. It makes it more scalable. It takes away the worry of having to maintain a big on-prem hosting platform. So all these things they're doing are kind of moving them more and more to the kind of principles of cloud, headless, API driven. So yeah, and what that can give you is more agility, more flexibility, and a lower total cost of ownership.
Does that change your target market?
Good question. In theory, it makes it maybe more attractive to companies that might not originally have gone down that road. I don't think it has specifically changed who we are marketing to, but I think it does mean that maybe your smaller companies that previously would have thought, oh no, that's far too big and complicated for us. It could make it more attractive to them. I mean, let's face it, SAP, like a lot of these enterprise platforms, are not cheap, but for those businesses that know they're going to be scaling, this is, a genuine contender. And we're not just talking about SAP Commerce. I mean, the whole SAP CX suite. It is a genuine contender to allow a kind of ambitious business that wants to deliver a modern and fantastic customer experience. It is a contender, and I think the changes SAP are making are really helping them stay relevant.
Okay, so from a KPS point of view, so there's a lot of change that's happened due to COVID. As we know, buying habits, consumer buying habits, people shopping online that never would have before. And that's going to change the face of retail. So how has that impacted from a KPS point of view in terms of strategy and what you're doing with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, the last year has changed things beyond recognition, really. And you summed up, I mean, there's been a huge shift to digital commerce. So you had lots of people at home who were isolating. So regardless of whether stores are open, they couldn't go in. But also in the UK, non-essential retail has been probably shut more than it's been open in the last year. So that again has contributed to a huge shift to digital commerce. So we've seen almost every single one of our customers see pretty big growth in their digital commerce, up to about 120%, I think is the biggest that we've seen year on year. So, huge growth. My view and our view really is that this is not a temporary shift. So I would estimate you probably jump forward about 5 years in terms of the growth that we've seen. And what we saw last summer was very interesting. So when non-essential retail reopened, we kind of expected everything to start slowing down online and everyone returned to stores. But interestingly, whilst we did see a return to store, we didn't see a drop in digital commerce. It was sort of surprising. And I think what that tells me is, in all likelihood, once this pandemic is over, whenever that might be, we're not just going to go back to the pre-pandemic days. I think it is going to have changed customer expectations and buying habits. And you mentioned, Tim, people who are buying now online they've never bought before. There's my mother-in-law, prior to the pandemic, would never have thought about buying her groceries online, but had no choice, started to do it, found it quite challenging because supermarket websites actually can be quite hard. They're all about offers, increase your basket value, they can be quite aggressive in that. But she's never going to go back. Now she's worked out how to do this, and Sainsbury's is turning up every week or two. it's a revelation, and that's now moving on to other online shopping. And I think what we're going to see is a completely new persona, really, a group of quite a substantial group of customers who I'm pretty sure that when most sort of marketeers are putting together their user personas and they're working out the sort of journeys for these personas, I'm pretty sure in most companies they don't have 80-year-olds in there, because previously that wouldn't have been a big market for them, but suddenly there's a market there now. So I think for me, the old rule book on customer expectations, customer behavior patterns, they don't necessarily hold anymore, and we need to kind of revisit, reanalyze how customers are interacting with brands. That for me is a big takeaway. And another thing we found, we ran a roundtable event with a whole range of different customers in about August, September last year. So we had a football club, we had beauty retailer, building merchants, sofas, all sorts of different industries. And the overwhelming answer, when we kind of said, well, look, how has this changed things for you? Everyone wants more for less. They want things quicker. They don't want a 2-year or 18-month big delivery before they get anything. That's they want that agility to be able to change, move fast. And that really struck home to us, that we need to work on ways of delivering more quicker and for less, because in a world that is changing so rapidly, you can't stand still. You can't take 18 months to do something. So we're working on ways of how we can speed up things, everything from our consultancy and discovery all the way through to delivery. And one of the keys to that is actually something that KPS has done very, very well within the ERP space, is this sort of rapid transformation and standardization model, which is really looking at actually, in most websites, you've got a certain load of features, stories, whatever you might call them, that are pretty much the same throughout every single website. And actually, if we look at using best practice and standard and pick things off the shelf, either from the creation of a user story or actually a component, we can actually use a model of getting things done much more quickly. And also a kind of, let's get an initial release out as soon as possible, within a couple of months, and then start improving it. So, done is better than perfect kind of approach. Feels that's where us as an SI, we need to change a bit and actually look at where we can become more agile, deliver things more quickly for customers, and give them more flexibility.
Okay. So you've been, how long is it now in the e-commerce space? 16,
about 20 years.
20 years now. Okay. And you've taken Foresight to Envoy and to KPS, and you're still in that space. So what is it from you personally that's driving you to continue to do the work you're doing within digital commerce?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's exciting. It changes. It changes rapidly. I think the question. You've got two things. One thing that kind of gets me up in the morning is actually running and building a company. And actually seeing the growth in our company, seeing the reputation that we have, seeing how our colleagues like working at KPS, that we try to run it in an honest and respectful way, both to our staff and our customers. So I think for me, that is one of the things that gets me up, is actually seeing what we've built and how we're still continuing to build it. But I think staying in digital commerce is that I don't think there's many industries that have changed so much and had such rapid change in itself. over the last 20 years. I mean, we've gone from when I've pretty much been in the industry since it started, right? The late 90s. There were there's no broadband, didn't exist. It was all dial-up. There were no smartphones. It was very early days. I remember, you might even remember, this thing called WAP, which was the web, I can't remember what it was called actually, web something protocol, the wireless something protocol, I think. And it was all really a very, very basic protocol to allow you to create kind of mobile sites, but it was all text-based. It was very, very basic. I've been in an industry that's gone from that to what we have now, which is full, customer experiences that allow brands to engage with their customers across so many channels. So fundamentally changed, and I've seen that happen. And I think that's why I'm, very happy to be in the industry and have stayed in the industry.
I think there's still so much room for innovation as well. If you look at where we are now and some of the topics you see online and the blogs that you read, and you wonder what's next, because there's always something that's coming through, and just when you think you've hit the nail on the head, something else comes through, a new technology comes up. And to me, that's what really interests me, actually recruiting into this space as well.
I think I'm slightly allergic to the next big thing, kind of. Often when you'll say to people, what's the next trend, they'll say voice commerce, VR, AR, and I'm like, really? Because I've heard voice commerce has been the next big thing for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. And we've always used Alexa or Siri, and you're like, come on, this is just not great. I think I still think, if we're talking about room for innovation, we haven't cracked, or most brands have not cracked, things like single views of customer, personalization, search, AI search or intelligent search. We're really at early stages of that. Most brands are. They're not, or omni-channel even, they're not new new concepts that are the next big thing. But in my opinion, most companies don't do those things particularly well. Most companies will have multiple views of a customer. They might have a view of their web customers, a view of their store customers, but they don't have single views. And actually, from that single view, you can then drive more and more personalized experience, personalized search. When we will get to the stage, I think, that most websites will have our own individual personalized experience. All the products, all the search merchandising will all be tailored towards us. But most brands are a long, long way from that. So, I think there is still so much room for people to get that right. Because those kind of things are going to have the biggest impact on a company's KPIs. Rather than, you remember, or you might remember a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, ASOS brought out the sort of AR concept on their app, where you could kind of see the model standing in front of you, twirling.
Catwalk.
And it was kind of cool and it was fun, but did that really make people buy more? Has it really taken off? I don't think so. And I think those things are they're good for generating PR, but the things that are going to generate the biggest KPIs, provide the best customer experience, are some of those slightly older concepts that just hardly anybody's actually done particularly well. And there's lots of new tools out there, customer data platforms. There's more and more appearing that are actually lower cost, more flexible, and more open to many more companies to be able to start really understanding the customers better and then delivering a much better experience to them. But if you're talking about what you just said there, James, about is there room for innovation? It's a discussion I was having just yesterday, actually. So we have this thing called our Digital Acceleration Program, which is designed to do lots of objective research on best practice, and then bring to the customer a load of sort of opportunities to improve their KPIs. And it helps inform their digital roadmap with some real sort of research and evidence-based decision making. And one question that came up yesterday is, are we going to run out of things, run out of kind of innovations and suggestions to customers because they've done everything. And I think the answer was we're a long, long way from that.
Yeah.
There are so many things a retailer or any digital business can do to improve their experience.
Well, that's kind of where I'm going, because we've come so far and there's talk of the next big thing or more to come, but actually where we are now, there is still a lot of room for improvement, like you've been saying. So going back to kind of where we were earlier and what excites you about the innovation in the space is that I think as a consumer, we feel as though we've come quite far, but actually as someone who operates entirely in this space, what you're saying is, Joe, we've actually not even come that far, and we still got to catch up to where we believe we are now before we even think further ahead.
Yeah. There's a tiny handful of companies that are really sort of pushing it. So Amazon trains us on our expectations. We can order on a Saturday evening and it comes on Sunday morning, and that might sound pretty boring, but the innovation behind that, to actually be able to achieve that, the supply chain involved in me ordering at 9 p.m. on Saturday and it arriving 9 a.m. on Sunday, I mean, that's phenomenal. And there's not many companies that do this. Amazon, the likes of Amazon are pushing it. It makes us think, oh yeah, this is normal, this is standard. But actually, other companies trying to do that, trying to actually keep up and meet the expectations that us as consumers are being trained into. There's very few companies that actually really do that. So I think there is still tons and tons of space for almost every digital business to innovate, to deliver a better experience before having to go to the next big thing, the fundamental shift from mobile to VR, for example. Let's say that was going to be the next big thing. I'm not convinced it is. Yeah, we are so far away from a fundamental shift. The last one I guess we had was probably from desktop to mobile. So we now see 75 to 80% mobile traffic. That's really accelerated, and that's been a fundamental change in many things. Just in terms of user experience, in terms of the technology, and that next big shift, we're probably a little way from what we need to do, and what we need to help our customers to do is to start delivering, take all those opportunities to deliver a better experience. And I believe the main things over the next few years are single views of customer, personalization, personalized search, and intelligent search. These are things that can make a massive difference to the experience in your KPIs.
Sorry, Ran, sorry to jump in, but so you obviously talked about AR, and I've had the experience with AR and buying a front door for my house, and you load the picture of your house, you put the front door on, kind of gives you a rough idea, and it's okay, but it is a bit gimmicky, like you're alluding to. But what about artificial intelligence and machine learning? And is there not a big gap there to use AI for a much better customer experience?
Yeah, I think there is. I think that's a good point. You've got a number of sort of third-party search and merch companies and personalization companies now offering a kind of machine learning to understand the customer more and deliver a better experience, sort of a personalized experience based on their behavior. I think it's still early days, but ultimately it still comes down to data. To understand the customer, you need a little bit more than just how they browse the website. So, a lot of that still comes down to that kind of single view. If you can really understand your customer, you can then use something like AI to start understanding, well, what for this type of customer with all of these attributes and all this behavior patterns, what is the best set of products or the best content to show them to give them the best experience. So I totally agree that the use of AI in doing that will make it much easier for kind of merchandisers and marketeers to deliver that better experience, but you still got to get the data. You still got to bring it together to really understand the customer.
Okay. And what about headless commerce? So we've kind of touched on it, but is it a thing, or is it a well-marketed buzzword, which is something that has actually been available to clients, retailers for a while now?
It's been available for quite a long time. The technology's been there and it's been used for quite a long time. I think there probably is somewhat of a kind of marketing spin on it, but there is real substance behind it. So I think by using headless commerce, it makes it much easier for companies to use multiple services, multiple bits of data, multiple platforms, all being delivered through sort of one headless front end, really. And what that kind of gives you is it allows you to deliver a better customer experience, because you can actually use kind of best of breed solutions and services, not just sort of one big service. But also it makes it easier to maintain, as I said earlier, things like deployments are so much easier with headless, because you're just deploying that headless front end, you're not deploying the entire platform. So it's more and more common for us. I would say we do more headless than not now. And I think there will come a time that that's all we'll do. We will always do headless commerce. In theory, you can have a headless commerce front end and swap out your commerce back end. Not many people will do that, but that's really the concept. It doesn't tie you into one big platform. You can pull in multiple services. You might have a review service over here, a content management service here, maybe a promotions service over here, pulling more into one headless front end. So there's proper substance behind it, but I think it's not as new as you might think. I think it's just been talked about a lot more. It's been given a name, and there's a lot more noise about it, but I think rightly so.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to go on to the last three questions we want to ask everyone that we speak to on the podcast. And three questions we think are really important to just try and understand what your view is on the future of digital commerce. So the first question for me is, and I understand there will be multiple answers potentially for this, but from your point of view, what is the single biggest challenge that you think retailers are going to face in the next 2 or 3 years?
Mm-hmm. I think it's maintaining the kind of brand loyalty and customer experience, because as we've seen a shift to digital, it's kind of harder to maintain, in a way, that experience and loyalty online, because there's much more competition, and you're losing that kind of one-to-one in-store experience. So I was speaking to a high-end fashion brand. It was a sort of designer brand the end of last year, and they were having a real hard time, because their whole business model was based on the experience of being in store. It's very, very high-end, expensive stuff. They had hardly invested in digital at all. It was all about the one-to-one experience you get when you walk into that store, and they have very, very loyal customers because they have that experience. Now, as we're moving more and more into digital, it's harder to kind of maintain that experience and that brand loyalty. So I think for me, that's the biggest challenge. Moving online is great, but you've really got to think about all of those different touch points you have with the customer. It's not just about that one-to-one experience in store anymore. So I think for me, that is the biggest challenge, is maintaining brand loyalty and customer experience, where you move from kind of offline onto online. And with, obviously that's accelerated over the last year.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think the whole loyalty piece is so hard when you just have all of the competition literally at the click of a button, and
Yeah.
within 30 seconds you could get 10 different quotes on one item and probably buy it within a couple of clicks from there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, in the olden days, offline retail, you go into a shopping center, you are competing with the shops in the shopping center, right? Those customers have gone into the shopping center to make a purchase. That's your kind of competition. You move online, it's not just sort of local competition, it's global competition now. And so, it's a great leveler. So, you don't need to have a massive high street presence to kind of be successful. But it does mean that if you are a traditional retailer, you're now opening up to a lot more competition. So you've got to work a lot harder to provide experience, provide a reason for the customers to buy from you rather than the 1,000 other shops that are maybe a bit cheaper than you. And so it's all about the customer experience. And that, I think that's the biggest challenge they'll have.
Okay, that leads really nicely on to the second question as well, because question number 2 is, will the high street still be around in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is yes, but for certain products more than others. So there's some products that you still want to touch and sit on and try, a bed, for example. So, if you can spend a fortune on a bed, and it's a very important thing. You spend most of your time lying on this bed. You want to try it, you want to look at it, you want to feel it. So we think there's certain products that are very suited to high street, but then I think there's others. So electronics. And I think I'm probably very similar to many people. I just always buy those online. I don't go into a store to try a TV. I look at reviews, I'll buy online, I can return it if I don't want it. So I kind of feel there is a future, but it's going to change a bit, and there's going to be certain kind of brands and products that are going to be much more online and much less so on the high street. The high street will become much smaller. In fact, I was speaking to another customer. They're looking to kind of reduce their footprint on the high street quite significantly. And I think what you'll see is a kind of consolidation of those stores that are less profitable. We'll start to see those going, and a lot of retailers will stick with the high profit stores and try to push more on to online. So
going to
to answer the question, yes, it will be there, but it will be a different one, maybe smaller, and certain types of products will have much less visibility on the high street.
Okay, so going to the example you used with beds, I guess historically we would associate going to get a new bed or a new table and chairs from quite a big industrial park. You look at like your Bensons, your Dreams, etc. They're not really on the high street per se. They're normally a couple of blocks away in a big estate. So do you kind of foresee them scaling down their size and being more prominent on high streets?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could. I mean, you're right. Sometimes if you're going in to go try a bed, you got a size issue there. But I think you see smaller versions of those kind of shops now on high streets. I think you are still going to have the big kind of warehouse, industrial park kind of things. But I think we'll see some of those kind of smaller versions, but again, only in the places where they're very clear that they're profitable. And so I think inevitably the high street will get smaller. So we'll probably see more niche, independent stores on the high street, but then we'll have some larger brands, but other larger brands, I would imagine they'll just have a smaller and smaller physical footprint.
Okay.
So last question then, and again, probably a difficult one to answer because there's going to be quite a lot of tech that may disrupt the market, but what do you think is going to be the single biggest piece of disruptive technology that's going to impact digital commerce?
Again, not massively exciting, sort of sexy answer, but I think search and personalization with AI, with effective customer data platforms. I think really seeing those get a lot of traction now. And, I believe that is going to really change the experience that a lot of us will get. Really tying together a decent CDP, customer data platform, with solid search and personalization engines, we'll start to see much more personalized, targeted experience. Not just I see the right advert or banner, but actually every product that's put in front of me, I am much more likely to buy. So I think that they haven't really had massive traction until fairly recently. And I see over the next 12 months, those having a big impact. That's what I'm seeing customers really start to focus on and look at. And I think that will make a huge difference to the experiences we have online.
But how do you think that there's a big rise in people's views on how their data is managed?
Yeah. And
wanting to use browsers that will restrict how they're tracked. Obviously, we now have to, based on GDPR, you have to get people to accept all the cookies and the functional, the tracking cookies. And more people are much more aware of what is happening when they are clicking on URLs. And is that not going to cause a problem for retailers if more and more people are restricting what they allow the retailers to collect in terms of data?
Yes, I think it will. We're already seeing that now. We're already seeing challenges with analytics. We're suddenly losing a whole stack of analytics because lots of people are sort of selecting, I don't want any cookies. So the technology providers need to adapt to be able to deal with that. So, it is going to be a barrier, I think, to the level of personalization they can do. If somebody wants to completely remain anonymous, what you maybe just been able to do is base your personalization on the particular session, the clickstream data, as they're browsing through the site. I wouldn't kind of call myself an expert in the technology behind how these companies manage to identify customers, but I don't think we're seeing too much of a challenge in terms of the customer data platforms that are being used and that our customers are using. We're not seeing too many challenges yet. We're seeing the odd things, as I said, around analytics, but it's not just browsing the website. I mean, this is the key thing. We interact with brands in so many different ways. It's social, email, text messages. We see them on TV. We go into store. It's not just about whether you accept cookies or not. So I think there are a lot of ways where data can still be gathered, and generally it's not gathered in a way that's allowing, it's not a nefarious way. It's the best way it can be done is to deliver the best experience to the customer. The customer enjoys the best, and in that instance, it really is a win-win. The customer is getting to see the products that they want. And obviously the retailer is putting the right products in front of the right customers.
There was actually a man pitching that on Dragon's Den recently. Did you see it?
I did see it. So Generate. And that's interesting. It was very interesting. I mean, it was probably the best pitch I've ever seen. And every dragon was tripping them over themselves to invest, and they all invested exactly what he asked for, which I've never seen.
I know.
It was interesting. It's allowing people to monetize their data, really. But I actually signed up to it the next day, and I did struggle a bit, to be honest. I found it quite hard to use.
Oh, okay.
But that is interesting. It is allowing people to actually, in theory, allowing them to monetize their data. So I was actually thinking of that exact thing when we were talking about this subject just now. That could be an interesting and disruptive technology. Put some control back in the hands of users.
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking. I didn't actually see it live, but it came up on social media, and it was like, this is how you pitch. And yeah, it caught my attention from start to finish. And actually the product, the degenerate itself, is actually really appealing as well.
Yeah, it looks interesting. I think it's an interesting concept, and it would be interesting to see if it really does take off. Because you're absolutely right that consent and personal data is very hot. It's a hot topic. It's important, and in some ways, it's a challenge when you're trying to deliver a personalized experience if you can't get enough data to understand the customer. But that's where we need innovation to allow that to happen without sort of invading someone's privacy.
And I think people need to be won over again and convinced that their data is safe as well.
Yeah, I think so. Everyone has different kind of views. My view is my data is out there, right? Most of us, our data is out there. And there's not much I can do about that now. But it is, it does make you think a little bit more about the more personal stuff. People are a bit more careful about giving away their data. It's certainly something I tell my kids, that anything you stick online is going to be in there in 20 years' time. So, when you're looking for a job, a picture of you on Instagram doing something stupid, it's going to be there, right? So, it's educating kids really that they're putting their lives online.
Yeah.
That doesn't go away, and they got to be very careful about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, look, thank you very much for your time and giving us all the insight and background to your story. Very much appreciated. And there's plenty for us to discuss. We'll have a little wrap up at the end of this between James and I and go over the points. But yeah, we really appreciate your time.
All right, no worries.
Thank you very much, Bran.
All right, see you guys later.
Thanks, Bran. Cheers.
Bye.
Top takeaways. I was really interested with the emphasis he put across the improving the search and personalization, improving customer loyalty and brand awareness, getting that single view of customer, and how that's going to be key for customers, for companies to really engage with their customers and keep the loyalty. That was one of the key takeaways from me. The other was the perception of SAP in the marketplace, and I do generally believe more than half the people I speak to see SAP as this big monolith platform, and actually it's not. And for whatever reason, that isn't being pushed out there in the marketplace, and it's probably doing them a bit of a disservice based on some of the stuff that Bran was discussing today and what they're doing now and where they're going. What about you?
I think the fact that he's effectively said that people aren't doing the basics well enough yet. So omni-channel, the various channels in which the consumer will engage the retailer, they're still not doing those basics well enough. And there's lots of nice fancy new tech, and there's AI and there's AR, there's voice commerce, etc. But getting those basics right is going to be what drives the biggest revenue growth. That's effectively what he's saying, which is very different to what I think we've heard from some of the other people that we've been speaking to on the podcast.
You're right in that for sure. But actually, I think it goes back to everything in life, and you learn the basics first of all, and once you've mastered the basics, you then look to innovate and improve. There's no point in improving on something in which you still haven't quite mastered the basics.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you to all our listeners for listening to another FODcast, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.